published Veronica's book, Empty Set, in English in translation by Christina McSweeney. I have here also the edition published by Almaria in Mexico with a funky little cover. It's very cool. But I was wondering, just to start, if you could talk a little bit about Empty Set and tell us just where your inspiration came from in writing it. It's been described as an artist's notebook meets a novel. And I think if you take a look inside, you can see why Veronica does these beautiful diagrams that depict kind of the paths, the emotional paths and landscapes of her narrator. So tell us a bit about where this project came from and your work as a visual artist and also as a writer.
Well, thank you, Lizzie. I'm very happy to be here, and thank to all of you for being here too. Also, I want to thank to Hector Melo, who is in the back. He is the person who brought me here to Minneapolis, and he drove yesterday in the middle of the storm to pick me up in the airport, so kind of a hero. So thanks so much, Hector. And to start trying to respond to your question, when I started writing Empty Set, the first name of the manuscript was Diagram. And when I started presenting the project into scholarships and other spaces, what I wanted to do, the aim of the project was to write a novel which could run out of words. I wanted to write something that will be running out of words. Of course, I didn't manage to do this because you will find a few words in the end. But if you study the book and you put all the pages in one page, if I try to imagine that, you will see that the text goes in a reduction, and then the drawings will go in the other way, right? So this was the thing I wanted to do, because I was I studied of visual arts. This is what I studied and the field in which I work, also of course in the literary field now. But I always consider myself as a visual artist who writes. So I write from the visual art. And these kind of projects, like the one I'm trying to describe now, are the projects that visual artists imagine, I suppose. I don't know if a writer would imagine something like that. Maybe yes, I don't know. But the search I have been developing in the, I don't know, since I finished school, has to do with how to work with images and words, and how to get to the limits of language, so we could find other ways of saying things or understanding things in the end. This is more or less what moves me to do Empty Set, and of course there are other things. This is like the aesthetical project, to say somehow. There's a personal project there too, which has to do with to talk about the consequences of being born exiled, because my parents came from Argentina to Mexico, and this is why I born in Mexico, because of a dictatorship in the country. So there are, I think those two are the main projects in the book, but there are others. The main things that move me to.
Thank you so much. That was lovely and opens up room for so many more questions.
That's right.
I did think that maybe we could read a bit first, if you would like, and then move into some more questions.
Yeah.
And I have also some of the drawings from the book here, in case you're unfamiliar, to share those share this with you in a visible way to those of you in the back. So if you like, we could just read a bit
Yeah.
straight up.
You will read in English,
Okay,
right?
Sure.
Do you have a part that you would like me to, or whatever?
Whatever moves you.
Okay, let's see. Maybe I will read a part that has no drawing, will be easier. Let's see.
We did not discuss this ahead of time.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I think I know now. La página 15, bueno, no es la misma, pero... Okay, I will read in Spanish and then Lizzie will help me with the English. ¿Cómo fue que llegamos aquí, a este punto? Todo se remonta a 2 días antes de mi cumpleaños número 15, invierno de 1995. Entonces yo, Y, tengo todavía 14 años y mi hermano H, 17, a punto de cumplir 18. Era temprano en la mañana, estábamos saliendo de la escuela y mamá M dijo que no. Dijo que era mejor quedarse en casa. Dijo que no prendiéramos la tele, que no prendiéramos nada. Dijo que había que guardar silencio. Nunca cumplí los 15 y eso que ya habíamos encargado un pastel de chocolate amargo para una fiesta que nunca se hizo. Su interminable ausencia, la de mamá, M, se llevó todos nuestros cumpleaños, enredó el paso del tiempo. No hay causa reconocible, solo efectos. Corrijo, solo una frontera en el espacio-tiempo, flujos turbulentos, entrecortados. Solo una serie de pistas dispersas, sin sentido, un conjunto que se va vaciando poco a poco. Fragmentos desordenados, corrijo, añicos. Repito, invierno de 1995. Mamá M empieza a hablar de los árboles del parque. Dice que en las cortezas se ven rostros, que todos esos rostros miran hacia la casa, que todos esos rostros nos miran. Nos ordena dejar de regar las plantas. Si algo llega a pasarme, dice, ¿pasarte qué? Mi hermano H y yo Y respondemos en coro. Después ya no logramos entender qué dice. ¿O es que no nos oye? ¿Qué dices, mamá, M? Así es como empieza a difuminarse. Y al final ya no podíamos verla.
Beautiful, thank you. How did we get here to this point? It all goes back to 2 days before my 15th birthday, winter 1995. At that time, I was still 14 and my brother, B, was 17, almost 18. It was early in the morning, we were about to leave for school, and Mom, M, said no, said it would be better to stay home. She told us not to turn on the TV, not to turn anything on. She said we had to be silent. I never had a 15th birthday. We'd ordered a bitter chocolate cake for a party that didn't happen. Mom's interminable absence took away all our birthdays, raveled the passage of time. There's no recognizable cause, only effects. Correction, only a frontier in space-time, turbulent flows, interrupted, ruptured. Only a series of scattered, meaningless clues, a set emptying out little by little, disordered fragments, correction, shards. Repetition, winter, 1995. Mom, M, starts talking about the trees in the park. She says you can see faces in the bark. Says all those faces are looking toward the house. All those faces are looking at us. She orders us to stop watering the plants. If anything should happen to me, she says. What? My brother, B, and I respond in unison. After that, we aren't able to understand what she says. Or is it that she can't hear us? What did you say, Mom? That's how she began to vanish. And in the end, we couldn't see her anymore. I think apparently we are under some kind of performer exemption. We were told. So. All right. Well, that section in particular that you chose really reminded me of something that I had really been wanting to ask you about. La literatura de los hijos, which is in direct translation the literature of the children, but books, novels that come out of dictatorships but are written by the generation born after. So kind of examining those holes in knowledge that come about as you're born kind of after something terrible has happened and you don't know quite what it is, and you're left with disappearances and trying to make sense of things that were never really shared with you, which I think is such so beautifully explored by the form that you've used with Empty Set. And that's a term that we've kind of applied to a lot of the books on our translation list at Coffee House. Alia Trabuco Serran, the remainder, Diego Zúñiga's Camanchaca, this idea of literatura de los hijos. So if you could talk a little bit about that and how that applies to your work or doesn't, I would love to hear it.
Yes. Well, I just read Alia Trabuco's book like this year. I got late on her book, and I think it's impressive. It's a masterpiece. And it's very interesting to me how I go on finding connections with Chilean writers more than Argentinian, no? But I don't know. This is happening a lot to me. Every Chilean book, contemporary book that I read, I find so many connections with Diego, with Alia, with Nona Fernandez, etc. So to me, this idea of how do you say in English? Literatura de los hijos, children literature? No.
Yeah, that is the direct translation,
Yeah,
but then it sounds like maybe
yeah.
okay. A picture book or something.
Yeah, it sounds different. Yeah, it sounds different. That's true. What I wanted to address is the consequences. I've read lots of books on the dictatorship, even on exile, which are both very complex experiences. But I was born in exile, so I was born after all of that, and it feels to me that after you narrate the dictatorship or the exile, everything is forgotten somehow. But there are many consequences after the years when people live through these traumas. So the book tries to picture one of these consequences, which is a weird kind of absence of the mother in this family, and how the architecture of their home transforms in a very weird place somehow. So this is what I was concentrated to try to do, because I didn't read at the moment any book talking about this stuff. What happens to the people 20 years after these events, right? And of course there are books or more books on that, but yeah, this was my. So I don't know a lot of the theory around la literatura de los hijos, but of course I understand why I'm inside this label. But to me is to try to talk about these other I don't know, events or experiences that are very complex too.
I love that you mentioned the architecture too of the apartment where they're living after their mother disappears, because the way that Christina has translated, it's referred to as a bunker, which I think is there's so much language that is kind of warlike language,
yeah.
But it's, we're somewhere in the aftermath of that war. And I guess speaking of labels, which we hate at Coffee House. I think. You mentioned that you were born in Mexico, but you were born in exile essentially, and your parents were Argentinian, are Argentinian perhaps.
Yes.
Still. And I'm curious what you think of the term autofiction, how much your biography plays into your writing, how present you are, because this is such an intimate text. It feels almost like we're being told the narrator's secrets. Are we being told your secrets?
For many years I struggled with this question because I didn't have an answer that I liked. And it was my father who gave me the answer, which is the one I will give you tonight. He said that a writer called Serge Andre, who is a writer and a psychologist too. I didn't read his book, I'm just telling what my father told me. That's it. He wrote something autofictional too, and he said his book, and I want to take that for me too, his book was 1000% autobiographical, which means 100% autobiographical plus 900 of additions, or 900% of additions to that. So this is the answer I have. I love this answer. I think it's perfect. It's perfect. So I won't say anything else.
That's another puzzle for us to figure out. Speaking of puzzles, I don't know why these transitions keep happening. Speaking of labels. You use a lot of puzzles in the book. There are acrostic poems and anagrams, and the drawings themselves are sort of puzzles. And I'm curious why you're drawn to puzzles, and I suspect that it has something to do with the holes in memory that you were telling us about earlier, but I would love to hear, especially the acrostics.
Yeah. Well, I can think of two reasons for the book to be very playful with the language. The first one is connected with what I said in the beginning, which is that I was trying to get to some limits of the language, and of course these games, I don't know how to call them, but these games help me in an aesthetical way to work with these limits, and also to connect with genealogies of experimental writing, on experimental poetry, experimental text-based contemporary art, etc. This is one reason, no? And the other one, I think that has to do with the character of the book, the Veronica of the book. I think she's kind of has some childish characteristics, and when you are a child, you play a lot with languages. I don't have children, but I have a niece, and I have been in contact with children as a teacher too, and they like a lot to play with words, to play with languages, to do all these games. They invent up words, they do many things that we adults forget. So I think it has to do with that too. I would have to think about the holes in memory and the relation with the games, because I feel it's interesting, but I don't have the connection now. Or maybe if you want to say how you see that, would be nice to hear.
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't know if I so much had a theory, but something about what you were speaking about at the beginning about the limits of language and where visual art can step in on behalf of language, and the games the puzzles kind of felt like a middle ground between the two, like language is reaching towards visual art, but not quite getting there, and then the visual art steps in. But we can think about that.
No, it's interesting. I take the homework home.
No homework for you.
Well, good homework, good homework.
And you mentioned at the beginning also that you felt the written language kind of diminished as
Yes.
you wrote, and the visual language was kind of augmented.
Yes.
Was that an intentional choice, or did it just happen?
No, it's totally intentional.
Okay.
It was difficult to work in this book because there is no program in the computer with which you can work with drawings and text. So I was coming back and forward from two desks, the desk of the computer and the drawing desk in my studio. And also I'm in the middle of being very analog and also how do you say in English the other word which is not analog? Digital. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot that one. So I wrote the text in the Word. Then I draw in hand and scan the drawings and then print them and print the text and cut up everything and did a lot of things in the floor with the pages, so I could prove to me that this was happening, because this was one of the few things I had clear when I started the project. So yeah, it was completely intentional. I wanted to run out completely of words, but I couldn't. It was impossible. Yeah.
Maybe that means words matter too.
Yeah.
I love hearing about your process. That's so much fun, and I think something I really admired about the book was just, you hear the term fragmentary novel tossed around all the time, but this really is a fragmentary novel. It doesn't, the events are so outside of time, so achronological, is this a word? This is a puzzle. And I thought, as you were describing your process, I was wondering if that was something that visually you were laying the pages out and you thought you saw relationships and moved things around, or did you have kind of these intersecting narrative arcs that that really don't follow a timeline, but follow more almost the narrator's emotional state?
There's a part in the book in which the main character, the Veronica of the book, she's painting plywood. How do you? What's the
plywood?
Board. Yeah, the plywood board with colors between black and white and all the grays in between. And she starts remembering what she knows about about plywood, to be more accurate, and how plywood is made. And so she starts talking about time and space, because, as you know, inside the trees, you can read the ages of the trees, and so how do you say betas de la madera?
Like the tree rings.
Yeah, but when you put them in the plywood, the name is beta.
Oh, the grain?
Grain, maybe.
The wood grain?
I think so. So it's like,
it's kind of pulp.
yeah,
The fragments of the tree ground up.
I don't know the word.
Mulch.
Chips.
But you all have the image, right?
Yeah.
It's not the rings, but the other thing you can see. And so the character is like trying to make her own theory of time, and she starts thinking about cones and how this is another kind of time, not the one of the rings that is linear, but another kind of time. So the fragments are trying to reproduce this chaotic order of the
Wood grain?
theory. Good grain, yeah, which is what you said, no?
Yeah.
Oh, Anitra, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I always forget that word, and I don't know, but yeah.
Me too.
So she's trying to do that, to like the structure, the time-space structure of the book is trying to reproduce this weird or invented theory of time-space that she develops in the book too. Some kind of.
Yes, I don't think I knew about this dendrochronology, the study of tree rings and time as represented by them, until I read your book. And also ice witnesses, which I'm so curious about. Similarly to the trees, the glaciers and ice contain histories within them that this narrator, Veronica, is fascinated by. How did you come to ice witnesses?
Well, I think I always have been interested in somehow in landscape to put everything in a word. Maybe it's not the best one, but just to try to explain. So in landscape and in astronomy and things that have to do with science, and somehow this is getting more and more important in my work. The last book I wrote, which is called The Company, it's about extractivism and how the landscapes are, how do you say, like, acabados, como
Like they've run out.
yeah, that. And it's a complex story, but this is something I just realized about my work. There are small lights about this, and this is becoming bigger and bigger in my work. So I think this is the reason to explain why those structures are there, and also this structure, the dendrochronology and all this thing I just talked about, the plywood, helped me to structure the whole book. And then I found out, I don't know, maybe I was Googling, or I don't remember very well, but I found out about the ice, how do you say, the ice witnesses. Ice witnesses.
So poetic.
It's very poetic, yeah. And I found out this correspondence. And since the book is full of mirrors, I think there are a lot of mirrors, not literally,
Not literal mirrors.
but like structural mirrors. Everything is like always has doubled. So the double of the playgood is the eyes witnesses somehow.
That's great. Thank you. I would love to be inside your brain. That was an uncensored comment.
I do not recommend.
I wanted to talk a little bit about archives. I don't know how we are on time, but good. Okay. I wrote down a quote. In the book, Veronica, the narrator of the book, is working on an archiving project, kind of sorting the papers and recipes and news clippings and all of this of a writer who's just recently died. And there's a beautiful moment. She just stays. She wants to keep archiving. She can't stop. She buys 100 different folders to put things in after she theoretically should be done. And there's a moment where she is reassembling this woman's torn up letters. And she thinks, as the letters were gradually reassembled, my conscience became increasingly uneasy. I'd taken on the task of returning to a moment that no longer existed, to the moment when the things those letters said were still true. And I think that's such a beautiful and evocative statement. I mean, as someone who's very prone to nostalgia and archiving and maintaining kind of a personal archive, do you use a personal archive in your artistic practice? Do you keep everything? Do you throw everything away? Do you relate to this idea that Veronica is expressing in that moment of reanimating something that maybe she shouldn't have reanimated?
Yes, I do keep an archive as much as I can, but not in a nostalgic way, my archive, but more because I'm very interested in the processes of things, and sometimes to show that process is important also for me. So this is why I keep an archive, and I think I like a lot your questions because each one of them is like pointing out something very important in my whole work, not only in Empty Set. I don't know how to explain this, but really these are very interesting questions for me. So archives are becoming, I realized afterwards too, that are a main part of my artistic project in general too. I always use archives in my projects. And for example, in this last book in the company is almost only layers of archives. I didn't write a word of that book. It's only layers of archives. So sometimes I think of Empty Set as a place where you can find, I don't know, like images of these main things that I'm still developing or something like that. So yeah, it's I like a lot archives, and I always look for documents or stuff that can be taken again into the present to rethink them, to rewrite them. I think one of the tools that I use the most is the idea of rewriting the past, rewriting the memory, but also rewriting documents, because these documents are unjust, or these documents are violent, or are something else. Something like that.
That makes me think of the author whose papers she's archiving in the book has written the same novel over and over
again,
word for word, right? So I mean, that's a totally different kind of rewriting, but that kind of desire to understand maybe, or the willful retreading of that ground. Thank you so much. I think it might be time for questions, but also I brought all of these pens and pieces of paper because I thought that you might want to draw your own diagrams, as the diagrams in the book are so, well, I didn't get to show you them, but maybe I will, just a few. There's this beautiful sequence that kind of shows you probably can't see it too well. There's the beginning of this relationship. And then the dissolution of this relationship, leaving the I there kind of with a piece missing. But we don't want you to have to draw your heartbreak. You can draw anything you like. So maybe I'll just pass around the paper and the pens while we take questions, and you can do as you please.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's perfect. Yeah. I was thinking also in drawings of things that don't work anymore. I'm thinking about that these days. So like how to do a Venn diagram of the things that don't work anymore in my life.
Right, she suggested that. No,
This is a
there's so
suggestion.
many.
You
Where
can
to
help me to
begin?
draw that.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a comment rather than a question, but one of the many things I loved about the book is that I came to the characters' expanding inner life by what I call hypermediation of this book. We go through so many things: physics, math, diagrams, language, games, the connections and the distinctions between death, disappearance, and exile. So all of those things, which could be confusing and to other people's minds maybe too heady, to me led to the heart. So I appreciated that I got to know the characters through these many associations and levels in the external world, that gave us a picture of expanding internal world. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thanks to you, really.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were reading the Spanish text, and then Lizzie was reading the text in English, I guess I work in books, and so I know this is how it works, but like your page turned sooner than the English one did, and I thought, oh my gosh, of course I know they have to retypeset after the translation and all this. But I was wondering if, as a visual artist and for someone for whom the physical and visual construction of the book was very important, what it's like to see it translated into English or maybe into other languages and see the shape of the text change too.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I never imagined will happen. So when it started happening, it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's go slower. Yeah, because so many details that change from a publishing house to another. Not only if you change of country, you can see that, of course, in the same country from one to another, if they use things or they don't, if they are open to not putting some things or yes or etc. So yeah, it has been a journey through design, editorial design, and I think I have learned a lot, and I still have to learn much more, I suppose. But yeah, it has been very interesting. Yes, I don't know. I always think, for example, all the process of the cover of this book was interesting. I mean, I think you can write an essay, and Lizzie wouldn't say no to that, right? Because it's like a whole different way of seeing, and how you get to a middle point in which everybody thinks something is working, or I don't know.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked about that, because you had to redraw the drawings because
Yes.
the letters, like yo for I,
also thought that
it doesn't correspond. If we would have just used the drawings as they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
and all of the letters have kind of a subscript, which in English, you say I, whereas in Spanish, the verb, you conjugate it, and that is enough to indicate who's being referred to. So we had to kind of be creative about that.
Yeah.
Christina, actually, the translator, ended up omitting I in most cases in the English version because it was just too many of those
Yeah.
subscripts.
And she also wrote this beautiful essay in the end of the book, explaining all that process, which was a complicated one.
Which
to,
you illustrated also.
And I illustrated that also,
We
yeah.
just kept making
Yeah.
you draw things.
And to work with Christina in this project, I don't know, make me feel so near to her. I don't know, it's like you develop a language. This is something that I also never imagined to happen, to develop my writing with another person in this intimate translated way, because I consider her not the translator of the book, but the English writer of the book. I don't know if it makes any difference to say it like that in English, but
I
this
think
is
it does. As a translator, I think.
this is what I think. This is my position with any translation of my work, So yeah, of course I work intimately with other people in my mother tongue when I'm writing my projects or doing my projects in a very intimate way. But this is other kind of, I don't know, it's like the mirror of the book. She's, I don't know. It's very interesting.
Rewriting.
Yeah, and she's rewriting.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Veronica, I have a question about the edition that I read in Spanish had an epilogue that you added
Yeah.
to the second
And I don't
edition.
know.
That's what I wanted to ask. That's what I wanted to ask. I haven't got the chance to look at the translation, and actually I wanted to ask about that. because it sort of recaptures the project. I mean,
Yeah.
the epilogue that you wrote,
Yes.
it's like, in a way, an explanation for those who didn't get it at the end. Like, okay, now let me tell you what this is about.
Yes.
And I appreciated a lot that epilogue, but it seems like the first edition didn't have it.
No.
And I'm curious to see. You just tell me that they didn't, but I wanted to ask
Yeah.
if they translate that or not. And if they didn't, why?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. No, yeah, it's an interesting story. I mean, the book was published in Spanish, of course, originally in this edition that Lizzie has. But then the publishing house, which I work with in Mexico, called Almadía, designed a new collection inside the publishing house, which is called Again. Again is the name. So they republished their own books, and one of the rules, but I think they are breaking the rule sometimes, but the rule is that the book is republished in cheaper material, so it's cheaper to buy the book, because this is I don't know, more fancy. I don't know how to say that. But then also the rule is that it has to have an epilogue, because it's again, no, that you published again. So when they proposed me to pass the book to this collection, because they decide when, I don't know how many runs they consider to pass the book to this new collection. Sometimes it's one run, sometimes with this were many runs. So I had to write the epilogue, and this was in 2021. So it was after the published Coffee House Press version, and Coffee House Press version has its own epilogue, which was written by Cristina, because she's the writer of this book, not me. No, somehow. So yeah, and this epilogue I tried to walk the process of the book from the end to the beginning somehow. So I found some materials that construct the ideas, and yeah, it's like a small essay on how did I write Empty Set. I could have asked the epilogue to someone else too, but I choose to do this like I don't know, like reviewing process of the book, and this has been done 7 years after the first time the book was published. So it's not so much time after, but a few years, like 7 is more or less, yeah.
You'll have to send it to us. So we
Yeah,
can
I
read
will.
it.
Yes, of course, yeah. I forgot to do that.
I have another question, if nobody else.
Yes.
Go for it.
So, Lizzie, we've talked a little bit about what it seems to me your proclivity for bringing to Coffee House books that have a visual arts background, or even like visual elements in them. Like, I don't know if you know this, but we have amassed this little collection of books now. I'll try and show you when this is done, but of like
Yes, please.
Who's Translating House 1, like, also has these diagrams. We're publishing a book this fall that has other like figures and drawings that are a really essential part of the book.
Which one?
Participation.
Oh.
And so I don't know, I guess I was curious whether you as an artist feel as if you're part of a community of other people exploring those ideas, like in literary work, and whether you as an editor are seeking out that work on purpose, or if it sort of finds its way to you. Yeah.
You start.
Thank you, Daly. I think I'm not seeking it out on In fact, can you hear me? I did not even realize that it was a trend. I know that I love that Coffee House has a nonfiction list that has grappled with the intersection of visual art and other things like horticulture and dance and performance art, and situated that within the personal narrative sphere. But in terms of fiction, it's not something I've consciously thought about. I think I am always looking for things that surprise me, though, as an editor, and I'm very surprised when someone does get to that limit of language and does take that leap of faith toward something completely different. So I think it's just more my proclivity, as you said, for this strange kind of boundary pushing books that we're so lucky to get to publish. So
I didn't know this, and I really want to see those books.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, please, please. And well, in Mexico, you ask about like somehow a community of people doing these kind of things, right?
Yeah, or if you find you have peers in
Yes.
that way, yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of peers. Maybe they are not writing books with drawings, literal, but they are thinking of the limits of the language, or working across disciplines, or yeah, something like that, or people whom I can discuss the experimental versus traditional, which is a little bit, yeah, but things like that. But yes, I think there's a lot of many poets that I'm interested in, and also visual artists that work with text, also many of them too, even students, of course, which is the people from who I learn the most, right? So yeah.
how are those drawings?
Yeah, show the drawings.
Yes, does anyone want to hold theirs up? No pressure.
Wait, hold on.
I like it.
I will, I'm going to come back here and take a photo if everybody would hold up their doodle.
Ooh, everyone's lives are so chaotic.
Great, thank you so much.
I like that. Well, Mara, do you have a question?
I have a half-formed question.
What? Sorry?
A half-formed question.
Okay.
I've been thinking about what you were saying about mirrors, and
Yes.
that reminded me a lot of, we have a book that just came out earlier this week called The Deja Vu,
Yeah.
which is a lot about like repetition and like change in the course of repetition. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about like why that seems like a really resonant idea for our time, and like why does that continue to be something that you're curious about? Why do you get brought back to that concept?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I love your question, but I'm not sure. I don't have a form
Yeah. Yeah.
answer, of course. But in the case of empty set, I think the mirrors are a way of showing how things that you take for granted or for real sometimes show up in another way. Even the disappearance of the mother is not a disappearance like that. No, it's not that she disappeared and she's there but she's not. So the mirror is like the way of creating the space in between, I suppose, no? And the name is Empty Set, so everything that happens in the book is around a big hole for me. This is what I try to do. I don't know. You are the ones who have the last word, of course. But I try to put everything around this hole, and so the mirrors help me also to create this atmosphere of something in between, something that it's there but it's not, and etc. So, but I never thought of what you are saying, which could be something of our time, this idea, and I will keep on thinking about it, because I think there's something true there, but I don't know yet what
I feel like you
exactly.
kind of described the pandemic time though. Kind of like
Yeah.
Black hole with
yeah,
mirrors.
like something where there's everything around but nothing in the middle.
Yes. Yeah.
Not necessarily a
And
bad
also
way.
there's
but like
the bunker is how we live these
yeah,
past 2
yeah,
years,
yeah, exactly.
closed inside your house. And,
I have just also regarding mirrors. The book ends with the mother breaking her mug, right?
Yes.
And right before I came here, it broke a glass. Proof is the cut on my finger.
Oh.
So what do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't know. That's only one of the endings. You can use all of the
Choose
others.
your own ending, yes.